Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of the Silsila series here. We've got some exciting guests here this week, so we're really excited to kick things off. We'll give just a couple minutes for folks to join here, but as we're joining, feel free to drop in the chat, where you're dialing in from would be great to hear. These always go better with a little bit of audience participation. So looking forward to a great session here, but really excited. All right, we got somebody coming from New York. Come by the office sometime when you're here. All right, some West Coast representation. Boston. All right. And while we're also waiting for others to join, I'm going to drop a link to one of our upcoming events here. This where the Last Mile team is going to host a hackathon with MongoDB. This will be in person in New York. So if you are interested, you should definitely register at this event. I just dropped it in the link here. All right, we got we got Sam from Amsterdam. We'll be hearing from Sam and Tobin, West Coast, Best Coast. Hmm.
San
Tobin, just
Francisco, where all
FYI,
the cool people are.
yeah,
The
I've got
mothership.
I
Okay,
live in
sorry.
Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, and there's a giant mural of Biggie Smalls here, so might be some West Coast, East Coast beef here.
We can get a little tension going in the recording.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Let me just get my screen share set up in the meantime. Phil, let me know when we should begin, but just
Yeah,
want to make sure I don't have any last minute hiccups. So let me know if you can see my screen.
we can
Sweet.
see your screen here.
All
We
right.
Why don't
do.
we why don't we give just one more minute, Sarmad, and then we can kick things off.
Sounds great.
And I'll defer to each of the presenters here, but do you guys have a preference on if folks have questions, should they drop them in the chat, raise a hand? What do you guys prefer?
Yeah.
Raise hands?
All
Let's
of the
Okay.
do
above.
drop it in the
We
chat. Yeah. And then I can read them to folks as needed.
Right. And we love
Okay.
questions. Please chime
Yes.
in.
Please chime in. It's supposed to be a discussion with everybody.
Great. All right. We've got a decent number of participants in the call here, so maybe we can kick it off now. Sarmad, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Cool. So, like Phil said, this is the fifth edition of the webinar series that we've been running on MCP. It's grown in popularity so much, and we were just chatting earlier that it's kind of bizarre that a protocol has gotten so much of the limelight. But I think it's also very important. And our goal really for this webinar series is to create a community for engineers to learn about MCP and about agent development. It's fast evolving as a space, and the protocol itself is changing. And so I think there needs to be a space to just have discussions and learn from each other. And really, our focus is to focus on the technical innovations and try to break through the noise. And as you know, the landscape for how we build these applications changes rapidly. It's really hard to focus on what is important and what may be like something that will change over the course of time. And so we just want to create that space. Also, this is meant to be a space to learn about things. So if you have things that you want to share as well, I think there are folks in the Last Mile team that you can reach out to be part of this webinar series going forward. Also, Silsila means a chain of events in Urdu, and I think chain of events is like a really interesting way of thinking about agents in general. And so that's kind of like a little bit of a trivia of why we chose this name for the series. Cool. So today's theme is about optimizing MCP for agents. There's a lot of pieces to this, and as we start to move towards production deployments of MCP services and of agents, it's probably a good time to chat about some of the intricate details involved and what it takes to deploy these things to production. And so we want to cover a couple of really heavyweight topics. So please feel free to chime in with your questions as we go through it. But first, we want to talk about scaling MCP for production deployments at hyperscale. And there's no MCP server better suited to discuss that with than GitHub, which has probably one of the first official MCP servers at scale out there. We also want to talk about what it takes to secure agents and also the latest around MCP auth because things are changing pretty quickly. And so want to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, there are changes coming to the MCP spec in November. And so we'll have a little bit of a discussion on like kind of the favorite things that are going to be part of that release and what that means if you're like an MCP server developer. And I'm so thrilled to have such an amazing group of folks to chat with today and who agreed to present at the webinar. So first, we'll hear from Sam Morrow, who's an engineer at GitHub, and we'll talk a lot about MCP at GitHub. There's a lot to discuss there. Then Tobin from WorkOS, who is the head of AI agents and auth there, is gonna go a little bit deeper into the agent side of MCP and kind of the fun challenges involved there. And I'll just be the humble moderator to kind of ask questions and just make sure that things go on track for the next hour. So with that, I'll pause and I'll let Sam have the floor.
Thanks very much, Sarmad. Let me just share my screen because I'm gonna do slides if that's okay. How's that?
Perfect.
Showing up okay? Awesome. All right. Well, as I've been introduced, I'm Sam Morrow. I've been at GitHub for about 4 years at this point, just over, and I've been the lead developer of the GitHub MCP server basically since we created the repo. I'm going to talk a bit about a story of kind of how building it's gone and like where it's going, and I'm particularly going to focus on the problems and solutions that we kind of found along the way. I think that's probably the most interesting part of the story. And also, I was just curious if anyone wants to share. If if you build stuff with MCP servers, then I'd love you to put it in the chat just so I can scroll back through afterwards and see what you guys are building. So yeah, I'm just going to walk you through the story of building GitHub MCP, and then yeah, please interrupt me if you've got questions. So, as most of you probably know, Anthropic launched the protocol in November last year, and they had a whole bunch of reference servers, including one for GitHub that they had built, and it was very popular. So, we spoke to them and we ended up asking if we could build our own version and take ownership, and they were delighted because that's exactly kind of what they envisaged, was that people would be obviously building and shipping their own. So yeah, they agreed, and we chose Golang because it's a solid language for efficiency and for building kind of production web services. And certainly there's plenty of Golang knowledge inside GitHub. So then, yeah, we finally launched our local stand.io server publicly. And this is just shows some example tools and things in VS Code agent mode, which it so happened that we launched our open source repo on the same day as the GA of agent mode. Tobin, question?
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to interrupt, but I have questions just to keep things fresh. You're using Golang. How do you feel about the Golang SDK as part of these decisions to build it early? This was one of the least supported SDKs for MCP. Just
You
throwing you
know,
hardballs immediately.
no, that's not a hard ball, but I'm actually going to say I will mention the Go SDK. So I'm just gonna tease that I promise we will cover
Amazing.
it. But yeah, I mean, so like, I guess an important note to that is we started at this stage with the community built MCP Go repo, which was not an official SDK. And yeah, I mean, I could see how people might find that an interesting choice, like when, for instance, TypeScript and C Sharp were quite popular SDKs and had official support already. But anyway, we just decided to go with Golang, and we haven't regretted it. But yeah, at the time there was no official SDK, and Yeah, it was super exciting actually. There was a real buzz, and like once we launched, I was suddenly getting asked to talk about it on live streams and things. And I was doing trainings for like building your own servers inside GitHub, stuff like that to kind of get people onboarded. There was just a real buzz in the industry. And our launch was super well received. So we were actually the most starred repo on all of GitHub for the week we open sourced. And the stat I'm most excited about is that today we've got more than 3,000 forks. So people obviously are building all sorts of stuff with this, some of which they contribute back. But I think, like, I'm very curious. I don't have time to see all 3,000 and see what people have done. But yeah, and yeah, so issues and PRs, they were coming in really fast, and people wanted to use kind of features that didn't have tools and stuff yet. So it was both amazing, but it was also overwhelming. And we were trying to keep pace, keep merging stuff, and run experiments, and try to give users all the tools they wanted to add. Um, and success also came with its own challenges. So many people have probably heard of Simon Willison's lethal trifecta concept. And then, yeah, Invariant Labs came out with this post, which made a big splash about a possible way of doing exfil attacks using that. And it actually would have been applicable to almost all MCP servers that can do a bunch of useful stuff. But they specifically called out GitHub, which was a great PR move for them because it got a lot of traction, and so respect where it's due. But it also opened some interesting conversations internally. So we for example, like it was one of the catalysts that got me to speak to our secret scanning team and start at least preventing token exfiltration through our MCP server, and that's just that on. You can't turn it off. So if it tries to send a token to a public repo or something like that, it will just block it from happening. But yeah, like there's not really much you can do about this. I mean, for example, if you have a logged in GHCLI in your bash environment, it can do more than the GitHub MCP server can do in terms of dangerous endpoints. Like it can control SSH keys and things like that. Like so, I think you've got to ask yourself, what do you want to allow users to do, and what do you want to completely prevent them from doing? Like we have a read-only mode, and also you can run things inside of a sandbox or limit the available tools. Um, and you can also obviously you can also use manual tool call approvals. So I wanted to mostly leave it up to end users to use their own uh, kind of smarts to basically decide what level of security risk they're willing to accept while we continue to evolve and find new ways to kind of offer it out of the box. But yeah, this was both a shock, but also in a way unsurprising. Like we knew about the potential for prompt injections and things like that. Uh, and yeah, I was working on a dynamic tool selection feature and the concept of tool sets we added in parallel. So what I wanted was that users could access all of our functionality while exposing only a subset of tools. And dynamic tool selection allowed you to start the server with only the tools required to search for and enable tool sets. And actually, in April, I also prototyped a version using RAG, which was ultimately never released, but um, like it did help. Like the reason it wasn't released was more to do with feeling like it should be implemented by clients rather than a single MCP server. But yeah, we just wanted people to be able to scale out all sorts of workflows. But importantly, I was hoping that users would use this to subset the available tools to avoid context bloat and tool confusion problems. But what do you think happened? Everybody uses the default settings, and almost nobody, customizes the configuration, even if it's only a sort of couple of minutes work. And so this was a real UX problem. But at the same time, like we couldn't easily fix it without reducing functionality or developing much smarter solutions. And things that complicate having really compound tools include the annotations in the MCP spec, where if I want to mark a tool as read only, it can be seen as safer by a client application. But if I try to combine read and write tools, currently the spec has nothing to support that. I just have to say that it's a write tool. And for example, in VS Code, that would then prompt the user to approve it by default. So like it's hard it's a harder problem to solve than it sounds for such a large platform. So to frame it with this AI generated image with very questionable icon choices, this is just, to kind of highlight how atomic tools offer complete compositional freedom at the cost of more context usage and more tool confusion. But it gets worse as the number of tools grow. Whereas conversely, if you make tools that wrap broader workflows, they can be much more effective and much less wasteful for tasks they're designed for. But they also cannot help with tasks they're not designed for. So, like a great example is, say, something like Sentry's MCP, where they build a great server, but also their platform has a smaller surface area, and finding, fixing, and managing errors like are great opportunities for kind of workflow based tools. And I'm not diminishing their work because they've put a lot of thought into the MCP interface they expose. But I feel like with the number of things you can do on GitHub, the problem kind of keeps like scaling to becoming difficult to solve if you want to enable everything. So anyway, like this is something we've thought about a lot, and I've taken in a lot of opinions from community and from blogs and things as well. And we do see a lot that people say, and yeah, we'll explore some solutions in a bit. But I wanted to highlight it was June when we launched our remote server, and suddenly it was a really easy installation story, no local runtime, no Docker images, and like it's very hard to get people to think about, oh, I need to pull the latest version of a Docker image to update the MCP server I'm using. So it also led to, before people had out of date things. Um, and yeah, like we worked hard to get a horizontally scalable, stateful MCP server with stats and monitoring in Datadog, logs in Splunk, error reporting in Sentry, and also avoiding logging personally identifiable information. So, it's kind of a tightrope walk of getting enough logging and instrumentation into the server and adding hooks in places we need them, while also not just logging everything blindly. And that's something we take super seriously. And yeah, the open source server we use as a library for the remote server. And the code in the private remote server repo is almost entirely like customized Kubernetes config, logging stack, and authenticate. It's all stuff to do with hosting a server. But yeah, VS, the one problem we had was that while we support OAuth, GitHub wasn't really in a position to build out and support dynamic client registration. Like we're a major OAuth provider, so actually like changing how we register applications and things like that, it's not something we can change overnight. And just for the MCP server is a big ask. So unfortunately, even with the upcoming OAuth client ID metadata spec, it's still not going to be trivial for us. So I'm confident we'll find a solution eventually, but yeah, anyway, that's a pain point. And yeah, this is another Gemini generated image with extremely questionable icons and a terrible GitHub logo. But the um the main connections here are clear. I just wanted to highlight kind of the rough architecture that hits our load balancer, and then the requests all go to a bunch of MCP servers, and we use Redis to store the sessions. And this is really important because uh, the initialize call, which happens asynchronously, furnishes a bunch of information, and also you have the session ID. So eventually we can make sure that all requests are using the right version of the SDK, and that we understand they're part of the same session and these sorts of things, which also helps our logging and understanding user journeys and things too. But um, that's something that really wasn't well supported in SDKs, and so we had to do a lot of extra work. Um, but It's also a reason why when we get asked why we don't support streamable HTTP in the like our local open source server, it's because we put loads of work into this. And for example, if we're gonna do one for GitHub Enterprise Server, it's gonna have to be one that we can actually support, which means meaningful logs in the support bundles and that sort of thing. So it's like it's not trivial. Um, and like another interesting quirk is that because it's not a one-to-one mapping of kind of agent to server like the local servers are normally used. We create a new server in the SDK sense every single request, and we dynamically build the set of tools based on things like the URL. You can use our tool sets with URLs or slash read only as well. Um, and also we can do feature flag experiments so we can try out new tools and things. And basically every request, we just build new server, supply the tools, and then the server you get like is kind of not an illusion, but it's entirely constructed at kind of request time, which I think is cool and enables us to also like experiment with internal clients and things for stuff we're not ready to release. So briefly, how's it going? Um,
Wait, can I ask? So that sounds like an enormous amount of work on top of the core SDKs. And so I'm curious to what extent, like that, all the load balancing management, this kind of like dynamically, like just in time spinning up of the server for calls. I don't see this in most of the way, at least the specs, the SDKs that I work with. How much additional engineering work did you put on top of these SDKs? To what extent is that open? To what extent do you even recommend people using this potentially Frankenstein system that you've designed? Do you regret those choices? I mean, you're going to do the how's it going, but I'm curious to hear more about all that.
no, no. So interestingly, the Go SDK has a more compositional approach, at least, which makes sense for building a server per request, and that's actually more how they envisaged it when the Google team was starting to work on that, which uh, I was happy about hearing because like they were by the time they were building the Go SDK, remote servers were already a serious thing, and so I think the problems that people were facing were more clear. But like this is one of them, which is that you just oh, sorry. I should also add, we actually, in order to get the authentication layer stood up at first, we also had to have a forwarder through our like our ingress facing layer. So we used a service that also hosts like Copilot kind of model APIs and stuff. But the consequence of that is that they do not have session affinity. So even if it would have been possible to use session affinity, so generally people hit the same server, by being forwarded through a service that doesn't, that would have been a fundamental impossibility. So, uh, yeah, I wouldn't. I don't think we've got an easy framework to share. But what I would say, and I really will try to think about what can actually make it into SDKs in the future. But um, it what a lot of the authentication and a lot of kind of stuff when you're on a large scale infra just can't really be fitted into the inside of the SDK very well. So unfortunately, I think like it's hard to fully generalize. Um, so yeah, like I wish I had something I could just share, like use this pattern. This is sweet, but it's like even things like feature flags. Like if your company uses feature flags, which I highly recommend, then building servers based on the request user, the URL, things like that allows you to ship fast. And it could also allow you could, by using the path matching, you can also deliver like 20 different MCP servers or an infinite number using exactly the same infrastructure, which is another like valuable thing from our side. And we currently don't leverage that much externally, but like I say, we do offer some different tools for some internal products and things. So Yeah.
By the way, I wanted to mention the architecture diagram you showed. It looked like it's so funny because it looks like it's from the 90s, even though we're talking about like some of the most sophisticated tech available right now for AI engineers.
You know what? And I'm a fun fact. I that was not lost on me when I was hitting the generate button, but how it was the only one. I tried like about 16 different images. It was the only one from Gemini that was close enough to the actual arrows pointing
Architecture.
the right way that so I ended up sucking it up and accepting an image that looked that
I
dated.
love it. You should ship that as the official docs.
I also kind of, it was a challenge to myself also to see if I could get some useful images out of the
Yeah.
Gemini generator because like, I don't know, like, I think everyone here has that sort of joy in that it's not quite working, but it's so close. Like, let's see what we can make it do and can we make it do serious things? And like, the answer is increasingly yes, especially with coding, but like,
Yeah.
yeah. I feel like for professional slide image generation, it's still lacking a little. So I hope you enjoy the rough and ready. Um, yeah, and so like to answer one of the questions earlier about kind of tool confusion and how we've addressed it, like the first thing is we wanted to do it right, and that meant building evals. So this is just a shot from an actions run from our Copilot offline eval framework. Um, but there's like I can't share. There's loads of output, so I can't really even share a single output from it. But we basically have a whole bunch of prompts and expected tool calls, and we can just run this on arbitrary versions of the server, remote and the open source server, and as we make changes to our tool offering, we try to do it more scientifically moving forward. And this delayed us a lot in terms of like sorting out the tools because we wanted to clean up the available tools first. I mean, we wanted to be able to clean it up without breaking stuff first. So once we built out the remote server properly and the scaling of that was working well, and we built out vals, then the next thing was kind of okay, what can we do to improve the tools? And so one of the first things we did was use the analytics from the remote server to see exactly which tools are the most popular. And we now have a default tool set. So we don't expose all tools by default, but we do expose all the kind of obvious ones. And you can tell they're obvious because they're also the most widely used. So if you want some of our more niche tools, you have to actually specify the tool sets that you want to use. And the tool sets, we're still waiting for some kind of grouping to actually drop into the MCP spec because uh, there's been repeated attempts to bring something like that into the specification, but thus far they never have. And so we've just overlaid this concept and kind of ran with it. But I would really love to not do that and to do something that's kind of supported because then clients could support it too. Whereas now, like, and I think that might allow us to offer ones that people don't have enabled dynamically one day, which is also like much more the kind of UX I would imagine. Um, so yeah, I saw someone in the chat say now we've got roughly 40 tools. I think we've at least when we initially did this, we had 52 tools, and yeah, we more than half the amount of tokens that the tool descriptions use. So that made a lot of people happy. But that wasn't all. We also did things like tool consolidation work. So, like a good example is there were a bunch of different issues related read tools, and now there's a kind of issues read tool that wraps several of them. So, I think roughly 40 tools is probably more accurate now because we managed to bring it down even further. And
Actually, Sam, while you're on that subject, Sebastian had asked in chat as well about API design for MCPs. So I'll read out the question and then maybe because this is relevant to what you're talking about, how do you choose which tools should exist and how much work a single tool should do? Uh, because I imagine like, it's not you're not just mapping the CRUD APIs on the GitHub API for like REST or something to MCP. How do you like bridge that divide between the MCP server API design and like a regular server API design?
Yeah, and that's kind of the golden question, I think, because what I would like to do, if possible, always is support workflows. And like what we're using agents for is kind of achieving specific tasks. So if possible, I would rather have the MCP tools kind of assist with a higher level goal. Like an example, like the actions tools we merged, but we merged them prematurely in my book. It was just people really wanted them, so we also didn't want to hold back when there was code ready to go. But like, right, do you want to parse an actions log for a failed CI run in your agent's context window? Like, it's a resounding no. Some of them can be like megabytes of text. There's just have walls of text output. Like, what do you want? You actually want things like what failed and why, and those are the kind of that's the direction of travel is making things smarter and trying to make tools actually do not just return the kind of API result, but like give some kind of useful result from the data. Uh, and there's also been experiments like people may have seen the Cloudflare blog, but uh, so in instead of having more powerful workflow tools, there's also like an alternative of having code generation run against more atomic tools and kind of pipeline them itself so that instead of calling all the MCP tools directly, like telling the model to write a script that can pipeline like 20
Mm.
calls or loop through something.
That's like code gen as a tool, basically,
Yeah.
which is code mode. I think that's what you're referring to from the
Yeah,
Cloudflare blog, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think like these concepts are only going to increase. Like if I have one kind of general ask to the community, it's like play with more adventurous clients, like build weird clients that have a slightly kind of unusual take. And I think we'll find the best value for agents and MCP will converge with clients that somehow leverage it in a better way than just putting all the tools into the context all of the time. Like I don't believe that's the future.
Absolutely. That's such I've heard there are some services that will like have projected like thousands of tools possible. And in that case, like think of like, a cloud platform or something and all the different services that you can interact with and an MCP server for that. It's like a crazy proposition. It's impossible to do with today's like context windows anyway. One of the things I want to do actually is I think there's so many questions. I also wrote like 10 questions while you were talking, Sam, but maybe we can have Tobin present as well, and then we can circle back on a lot of these questions towards the end because I think a lot of the stuff that Tobin you're going to talk about is also going to touch on some of the things that I imagine folks have questions about. How does that sound?
That sounds good. And like I'm basically done anyway. There was one question from Tobin that I kind of covered here, which was that we're currently in the process of migrating to the Go SDK. This is literally happening now, and we're using a custom agent definition with Copilot coding agent that one of my team members wrote to try and automate the process of getting each tool set kind of moved across to the new SDK. And it's a big process, but yeah, at some point very soon we'll just do a hard cut over and then we'll be on the Go SDK, hopefully for life, and then hopefully we'll get all the new features faster.
Let's hope.
Amazing.
Let's hope. Who's maintaining that Go SDK? Is that still Google
It's
or?
yeah, there's a couple of guys from Google are still the main maintainers. That's
Wow.
it.
Amazing.
Like there's two of them really that are super engaged, and they actually even offered to do some code review for our because a lot of people look at it and it's one of the like it is I think the most popular Go server by a significant margin. So like it's important that prior art represents what they actually wanted out of the SDK. So I hope we can get there. So yeah, this was it. Like the last slide, I just wanted to say, like, as a team, we're always doing experiments. We're always having fun, like trying things and like trying, like I said, like weird solutions to problems, looking for kind of what's coming. And we've looked at code gen for MCP agent to agent, like more advanced forms of dynamic tool selection, tools that use models to achieve more complex goals, loads of stuff like that. But it's also an open source project, and I've shared my story with you. And what I would absolutely love is if people have opinionated takes or want to make changes to our server, like regardless of whether we accept a PR or not, uh, like if you can help kind of change the way we think about delivering GitHub via MCP, that's amazing. So please, contributions are welcome, and yeah, I would love you to share. So yeah, thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sam. I have tons of questions I'm going to ask afterwards.
Yep, so many questions. I will jam on this. I'm gonna try and give my talk as the edge, the boundary conditions on what you just talked about. So I think tool selection and how to avoid context bloat and how you actually scale these servers. There are so many good questions there. And Sam, we should circle back to that and unpack a bunch of that. Let me pull up my oh, did that work? Can people see enterprise ready MCP?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll explain what WorkOS is in a second, and I'll try and do this pretty quick to save times and keep some energy so we can get back to some meat of it. But the story that I deal with every day, that is kind of the question that keeps me up at night, is everyone's obviously excited for MCP. But what does it take to actually bring it into the enterprise? Lots of companies are trying to build internal MCP servers to serve their employees or make an externally facing tool, sell a SaaS into a company using MCP. But this is not obvious how you get from a scrappy little local server into the enterprise. Kind of the core reason for this is that most MCP servers so far have been for developers, right? GitHub's a perfect example. We also, we don't have a massive risk tolerance, but we know when things go wrong. We kind of understand how the cookie gets made. And so we're really fast to adopt. We're seeing some more consumer MCP servers, apps SDK servers that are, nice. People understand them. People are willing to adopt them. They get confused if things go wrong, but it's okay. Problem is enterprises. They take forever to adopt technology, and they also have a very low risk tolerance. So you need strong security around that. So what does that mean? I hope everyone's heard the S for MCP stands for secure, that was being spoken at the start of MCP. I think MCP has gotten much more secure, but I still think this is a very funny joke to be made. So security means lots and lots of things. The one that I will talk about is the part where you try and connect your AI agent to the MCP server, and you want to limit that with really robust OAuth in between. API keys are very useful, and there's lots of context in which API keys are powerful, especially for long-running MCP servers, but there's a reason to protect to your server with OAuth. One, API keys for normal people don't make sense. Everyone here kind of gets an API key, but if you want your mum to install an MCP server, I mean, maybe a really cool developer mum, but like in general, they don't want to go and find an API key in the GitHub, in the settings, developer, something. They want to click a button that says, I approve this MCP server. It's also really useful when you have a registry, when you have these marketplaces. GitHub, as part of VS Code, has a registry of servers that you can use. Claude is working on their marketplace. Eventually, OpenAI might come out with one. It just makes a lot more sense when you're connecting an MCP to click connect, approve, and then have the MCP. It's a much better onboarding flow. It's a standard experience that everyone's used to, and increasingly clients expect or even require it. Admission to certain marketplaces and registries requires you to have OAuth because it is just a pain-free way of connecting to systems. It's got good security properties. We can run really nice unit tests on it. With API keys, it's harder to enforce security. A lot of the security is done on your server-side backend, so it's hard for a marketplace to enforce that. That's my pitch on why you should go with OAuth and not API keys, admitting that opening up to DCR is deeply, deeply, deeply painful. The other thing to note, the OpenAI Apps SDK recommends, I think strongly recommends OAuth and might even require it.
Yeah, I think it
And so
requires
like,
it now.
and so like you just, someone in your org is going to be like, we need DCI, we need client ID metadata, and that is deeply painful, and you're going to have to fight that fight to get it out. I do a lot of fighting this fight. There's not just that, but if you've ever tried to build enterprise authentication infrastructure, there's a lot of complexity to it. There is SSO and SAML. GitHub's a great OpenID Connect provider. You need to make sure you integrate with that. As your agents connect to things, there's ideas of agent identities. There's a bunch of work from identity providers on agent identities and how you provision or deprovision them, and you need enterprise-grade order logs. Sam talked about a bunch of this being in the GitHub MCP. I work for WorkOS. I have two jobs. I'm the head of AI agents for WorkOS, and I am also a research fellow at Stanford, where we do like agent reliability research. WorkOS is a security vendor. We do auth, but also a whole bunch of enterprise tooling to help SaaS companies scale into the enterprise. Everything from bot blocking that protects Cursor's API endpoints to really complex permissioning infrastructure, key management, that syncs with enterprise key management systems. Our customers speak for ourselves. We power all of Cursor's identity access management and security, all their bot blocking, all their key management. We power all enterprise integrations for OpenAI and Anthropic and Perplexity and a bunch of others. And our job is to take these new AI startups that want to sell an MCP server and give them an OAuth wrapper that works really well, that supports all of the latest spec changes, that is ready to scale into the enterprise, that supports SAML and SSO, so that folks don't have to spend weeks of their lives figuring out what dynamic client registration actually means, and then dealing with the inevitable security vulnerabilities it introduces. We will onboard that. We will handle that risk for you and make it easier to build an MCP server. We have our MCP product that is super cool. So, genuine offer. If you want to talk about the OAuth part of this stack, I care a lot about it. I have a lot of thought about agents' identities. And so reach out. This is, of course, paired with a lot of complexity that comes with OAuth, but also unlocks. You are using, Sam, URLs to customize the behavior of MCP servers. One way you can do this is just role-based access control. If you have really nice OAuth and scopes, you can change the behavior of servers, and you don't have to get a new URL. You can just connect and reconnect and have a change state or do a new list tools. And so I think the one part of that GitHub story that we didn't have is how does OAuth interact with this? And so now let's talk about tool bloat and all the fun that comes along with how you design these systems. Unless Sam,
Tobin, I'm very curious about identity in this context, because part of the thing that like the exploit that Sam, you'd mentioned, was really the fact that the agent assumes the identity of the developer, and so the exploits that would work on like my CLI, because I have like my private key or like my PAT available, would also work in the MCP case for agents. So I guess, Tobin, like, how do you think about agent identity versus user identity?
So agent identity is, like, I think, a genuinely very important topic, and it is way too overloaded as a concept, because there's everything from the client identity. So what client am I interacting with? Cursor? Am I interacting with VS Code? Am I interacting with Claude? Which currently right now is chaos because of dynamic client registration, but is fixed and made more verifiable with client ID metadata. But that's just client information as to what you're connecting to.
Yeah.
There is a secondary thing of what is this agent? Like, what is that? I'm connected to Claude or Claude Code. What kind of Claude? What is Claude Code's intent here? And so all of the identity providers, the Okta, Entra, etc., Bing Identity, all want to have robust notions of like managing your AI inventory and having identities assigned to agents. So I think there is a lot of work that is ongoing and completely unsolved as to how you tie the agents you spin up to concrete identifiers that are communicated to MCP servers to do robust enterprise-grade logging. And that's not really an answer to the question. It's a really big open challenge that is ongoing.
I'm curious what you think about this as well. Like GitHub, for example, the Copilot coding agent, when it does stuff, it specifically shows on behalf of, and I really like that. but it
Mm.
feels like most APIs and most things that exist don't have a space for that yet. Like,
Yeah.
is that something that we can see?
Yeah. So on behalf of flows, there's three ways you can do a flow. You can have a separate identity for an agent. You can have a you just impersonate your user identity, or you can have an on behalf of flow. And it's great, and we support a bunch of it, and lots of identity providers are excited to use it with agents, but a lot of folks don't support on behalf of. And if your
Yeah.
upstream provider doesn't support on behalf of flows, there's not much you can do. So it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of abuse of systems from agents, and then maybe we'll support it more.
Yeah. I'm actually curious on that front. So as things stand, how do you think about like auth from the MCP perspective versus auth from like a standard identity provider that
Mm.
exists? Like, what's the special sauce here that you think really makes a difference for MCP?
Yeah. I mean, we've always had login boxes, right? Like this is not a new thing. You've been logging in for a while. You've been, signing with Google for quite some time now. The difference is that in order to have really nice connections for AI agents, you need to support MCP type things, which is just weird. Dynamic client registration is weird. We've never seen that before. Resource indicators, not super common. Client ID metadata, brand new. These are all we've found this graveyard of specs and we've thrown them in. And that's a lot of additional work for identity access management teams, which is why a lot of the auth vendors are trying to provide custom solutions to help people move faster. Because I hate seeing a YC company spinning up an MCP server and then they're taking their very limited time and burning a week on it on
Exactly.
Claude code vibe coding auth infrastructure, only to
That's the
find
one thing
out that
you
the
probably don't
spec
want to
doesn't
vibe
support.
code.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tough. Yeah,
Yeah.
great question.
So, one last question on that, and not to belabor the point. Do you think this is like something that an OAuth 3.0 kind of spec would cover as like an identity for like AI systems more prominently, or is this something that should be part of MCP going forward in a more fundamental way? Because MCP is bound by like upstream auth, like you said.
Yeah. I'm co-chair of one of the OpenID Foundation's agent AI working groups. And OAuth 2 and OAuth 2.1 caused so much drama by calling it 2 and 2.1 that calling something OAuth 3, I think will terrify so many people and lead to so much debate that we will solve AGI before we ever have OAuth 3. That said, I think we will see a lot of incremental problem solving. Each of the identity vendors, Okta, Ping, Entra, have different notions of agents, and they're just going to ship products, and then everyone's going to find out how they can kind of move around them. We got WebBot Auth, which allows you to identify bots in the web, and lots of tooling. And I think all of this will organically emerge, and there'll be a lot of chaos and a lot of patchwork of solutions, and then we will end up with kind of what we end up.
It'll be more organic than like a concerted effort. That makes sense. Sam, on something related to this that I was curious about is, are you seeing any really interesting use cases of the GitHub MCP server that like you've seen out in the wild?
Interesting use cases. It's funny actually because I was just yesterday, I think, looking at a list of interesting OAuth apps that have connected to us, and like the diversity and some of the amount of connections are really, really interesting. Like one of the earliest ones actually was from Anthropic's team had a GitHub action that they were building that had access to the GitHub MCP as part of it, for example. Um, like there's, some people are using it in kind of ways that seem like they're probably automated rather than with agents as well. But yeah, I'm trying to think if I've seen anything like truly weird. I mean, one of my favorites is to get it to like uh so there's a prompt in it that allows you to trigger Copilot coding agent and it just pulls down a bunch of issues from the repo and it tries to rank sort of which ones it thinks an agent could do a good job of.
Mm.
and then just assigns them all to coding agent. Like it's pretty raw, but like I've
That's
done that even in live demos and stuff. And like then because there's got the Playwright MCP on coding agent as well as GitHub's one, like you can see often screenshots of. So like I often tell it to like redesign this website in like a bunch of like weird themes, and then yeah, like I don't know. For me, like it's really enjoyable. And then also agents are fantastic at like that stuff that I think is a really niche skill, like really great mermaid charts, for example. Like GitHub has great support for mermaid chart rendering, but it's actually like it's easy to make basic charts, but making really complex ones is quite time consuming. But telling an agent to like just spit out like I might, I'll even link in a thread, one of the last ones I did. But yeah, like it's really fascinating watching it just spit out issues that are enhanced with like really unusual kind of chart.
very cool. Um, that actually reminds me, one of the things Tobin you said was one of the reasons for OAuth is also that right now MCP is still probably very developer centric. It's very hard to use for like folks who are just regular people. And I'm curious if you think MCP servers in general will just be like subsumed by like a layperson may just use an agent, and the agent in turn may use an MCP server or a handful of MCP servers, and I may just interact with the MCP server by way of auth or like some kind of like giving my access or identity permissions, but I may never even know that an MCP server is involved in the process beyond that. Is that how you see this evolving going forward, in terms of like who interacts with these servers at the end of the day?
Yeah. I mean, I can really see a future where you're using Claude, and in the same way that Claude says you ask a question and it goes and it searches the web a couple of times. Maybe it goes and
Yeah.
searches your Google Drive. You barely even notice that it's going and using these things, and it just comes to you with a result. Is that
Yeah.
over time your Claude is connected to it's connected to your Zillow, and it's connected to your Gmail, and it's connected to your Amazon account. And when you ask it to do things, it just goes and does stuff. It pulls in relevant
Right.
information from kind of a consumer perspective. From a developer perspective, Claude uses MCP servers, Claude Code uses MCP servers all the time without my knowledge. Like I'll often just be on my computer and like Chrome will pop up. Like, it's like, we're doing a playwright. I
Yeah.
don't remember what I ran, but like, golly gosh, like, and it's just going and using the GitHub MCP. And I'm not really paying attention. I've tabbed out and
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter. So I do think we're going to abstract ourselves away a little bit from this.
Yeah. Sebastian had another interesting question around that. So, how do you deal with situations where the agent and MCP are owned by separate parties? For example, a user prompts a remote agent of some company that wants to call an MCP by another provider. What do you authenticate and with whom?
Yeah, this is a deeply challenging problem. So OAuth is great. It has lots of problems. What you're describing, where you're giving consent to a remote access point, is really painful. You can just pass the URL, but these systems are not designed, like there are protections against that, which makes it harder. Although kind of consent flows are designed to give access to third-party things. You've always had Calendly access to Google Calendar. It's designed for third-party access. That said, this can be a really problem in, for example, a GitHub action where it's not necessarily stable. Like an API key actually makes a lot more sense here than a user consent flow OAuth. There are OAuth versions called M2M, machine-to-machine, client credentials type OAuth flows, which have nice enterprise-grade security without needing an API key. But yeah, this is challenging, and you're going to waste so much time like moving around these tokens and URLs to get all the OAuth flows orchestrated. But it's worth
Absolutely.
it.
There's like a subtle level as well that's like not even just auth, but which is already a hard enough layer to solve, but nuances of privacy in data, there's some really subtle examples because I've been working a little bit with Den. Like I have an issue that I haven't created a SEP yet for, but that was trying to add on a sort of response annotations model for data that's private or what have you, or from a public source, so that you can kind of tell when they're intersecting. But there's all sorts of huge challenges there. And like I get one of the great examples someone kind of countered a suggestion I made with was that like you imagine an email server and like sure, like don't post my private email to like a GitHub issue or something like that. But there's even internally you've got this problem of like don't like my CEO has been emailing me about impending layoffs. I work in HR or something. Like do not send that out like across company. Like there's all these kind of privacy boundaries that are more like if anyone remembers like the whole Google sort of circles social media kind of like concept where there's
Yeah.
like it didn't get the traction
Freedom of
possibly it deserved.
information, basically. Yeah.
But it's like we have all these kind of almost Venn diagrams like going off into the whole world of different privacy domains. And um even if you can work out who the identity that's acting is and marry that up against each of these different services, you still have like an extra layer of thresholds that aren't even static. Because, like, for example, once the layoffs have been announced, then like you couldn't tell
Yeah.
from the email the state of the outside world either. So like I I think these problems are really interesting, and I'm glad that people like Tobin are putting a lot of thought into them. But like I think we have to also be pragmatic of like, well, what can we actually solve today that makes it better? Like maybe you should, if you're talking to the CEO about layoffs, maybe you should have confirmations on tool calls that are dealing with your emails, right? Like
That actually reminds me, we've talked a lot about tool calls, and I think when most people talk about MCP servers, it is through about like we talk about tools. What do you folks think about resources and maybe prompts to a lesser extent? But like, like, because resources are almost like these URI identifiers that relate to data. And how do you think of auth for resources, but also generally like maybe Sam, does the GitHub MCP server use resources at all yet, or is
yes.
it? Oh,
We've
okay.
had we've actually had template resources from the start, but they didn't have the completions API, and then the MCP Go SDK didn't have it for ages. So I actually built a
Hmm.
working prototype with VS Code who do support it, and I don't think I'm not even sure if we've got it live yet. Uh, but anyway, so uh, David, like DSP, who uh, was a co-creator of MCP, was talking about this at the MCP Dev Summit in London recently, but like he's quite disappointed with the implementation of resources thus far, and I
Uh,
agree wholeheartedly. Like, so we have a get tool, like sorry, a get file tool in GitHub's MCP server, but we also have template resources that can access all files you have available on all of GitHub, like based on your token.
yeah.
And I don't understand why host applications can't let the agent somehow navigate this and access any
Yeah.
of those files and not just access them, but not stuff them into context, put them through a RAG pipeline or allow a grep tool on them in a temp file or
Mm.
like do something that means that the agent's context doesn't get blown, but that the agent can autonomously use them to
Mm.
kind of further its goals. So I
I,
believe there's more to see.
I also really second that, and I think the problem is in the client implementation side to not support these things. So VS Code is amazing; it supports all of the features, but
Yeah.
something like elicitation is like a very few clients actually support it, and I think
Yep.
this comes down to anytime there is a clear use case for one of these things, it seems to push clients to support it. So resources, no one supported resources super well. I think now that ChatGPT's Apps SDK uses resources to send the UI component, but also
Yeah.
you can just return text as part of that. It means that a lot of clients will be forced to support resources because servers will put resources up to support ChatGPT. And I think we're going to have to see this chicken and egg with every single one of the features that aren't tools until clients actually support them.
Yeah. I agree. I feel like we're kind of like we need a flagship client that really does a lot of these things and pushes MCP to the limits. Resources for me is also an interesting one because it can be used for agents to interact with that data, but also obviously for like users to like application level use cases as well to access that data. Um, I guess one of the other questions I had, and I think Subhankar kind of touched upon this as well, is can you share some experiences deploying MCP in production for enterprise? And Sam, I think you had mentioned like uh, I'm guessing Helm charts or ways of like setting up the Kubernetes cluster, and then you have monitoring and a Redis session store going on. What are some of the, is it standard services, distributed systems infrastructure, or is there anything specific that is MCP specific here?
So yeah, the majority of it is standard kind of GitHub Go service. Um, and again, like the OAuth is very prescriptive about the URLs that, like things like well-known URLs and that kind of thing live. So there's some patterns that are just ultra kind of like rigid, and that's good. Like they should be. uh, Also, there's some confusion about some of those specs. Like for example, after the well-known URL, there should, like, if you use multiple URLs for different configurations, things like that, that should be appended rather than, like, I've seen people try to prepend it and put the well-known at the end and things like that. Like there's subtleties to implementing it right. So like rereading and rereading the spec when you implement it is, I guess, my top bit of advice, especially for the auth stuff. But with OAuth, generally, if you've done it wrong, it just won't work, which is good. That's a feature for auth. Um, but yeah, no, uh, I think that SDKs supporting hooks is the most kind of MCP specific thing
Hmm.
that, like, is you, especially because it's a JSON RPC payload. What you don't want, which we have had to do a bunch of times for different reasons, you don't want to double parse the JSON RPC payload because it's just kind of wasteful of resources. Like it's not so expensive that you can't, but like it's nicer if you can hit the
Yeah.
SDK, it can parse the payload, and then you can look at like the type of access it was. So um yeah, I think like where we can, a lot of our stuff happens like life cycle logging, things like that. Obviously, like we do log when things hit servers and right from the start, but we add the specific tool calls and like success failure when it starts and finishes, that kind of thing, like on kind of middleware inside the MCP SDK. And yeah,
Sense.
like that's the main thing. Like the rest is like almost everything should be stateless other than the sessions, like some individual tool, especially with the new tasks.
Yeah.
Um, like the tasks tool calls that are coming up, like long running stuff. Sure, it might need to be stateful. Well, it has to
Yeah.
be by nature. So then you've got to work out how to build all that, and that's like an extra layer of complexity. But um,
So the long running tool calls actually, so last question for both of you. I know we're a little bit past time. Maybe Tobin, we can start with you. That reminds me of the latest MCP spec changes coming out, I believe, in November. So I guess what are you most excited by in the new spec that's coming up?
Mhm. So there's a ton of changes coming to the spec. A lot of it are new features on the server side to unlock new capabilities. Some of it is new work on the client side to support connecting to those features, many things. Also, a few auth changes that are coming along. The two that I really love is native support for machine-to-machine credentials as an auth extension. This means that instead of using API keys, which have a lot of security issues in like big scale enterprise workload due to key management issues, you can do more robust auth. It's much better for enterprise use cases. And I love client ID metadata because
Hmm.
dynamic client registrations is a security vulnerability by design, allowing anyone to create an application in your service. And client ID metadata means you can do real robust whitelisting or blacklisting. It means you can at least monitor what clients are being registered and what the actual traffic of those clients looks like. So very excited for that. I don't know if
Nice.
Sam has a hot
Yeah,
take.
what do you think, Sam? What about you?
well, one that wasn't mentioned there is the OAuth scope challenge thing, which I think will be really nice because An example being like if you're a sensitive business and you want users to just have to think about it and use discretion, you can even start with a scopeless token and
Mhm.
then request scopes as the user actually needs them for things. So that getting baked into the spec, like again, I think a lot of the noise that you read about is kind of from the sort of young vibe coder types and like the deep techie types, but where a lot of the money and long-term investment in MCP is coming ultimately, as it always does, is from like large enterprises,
Yep.
and they have totally different needs and totally different requirements. So, um, like some of these things don't sound that exciting if you're not building something that large enterprises really want to use. But when you
Yeah.
are, and like obviously GitHub has a whole like host of, you know, like SAML using um, SSO kind of like, partners and large enterprises, like that's what we need to support so that they can actually use this stuff at all. And
Yeah.
like right now, like early adopters, including in some surprising industries, like I think weirdly, because it enables really quick analysis without having to ask loads of people, sometimes financial services companies and big consultancies and stuff have been able to move faster than you might expect. Like,
Yeah.
um,
We're finding that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
but there's adoption blockers, and I feel like Scope Challenge is a nice one for that because it lends itself quite naturally to kind of
Yeah.
enterprise adoption.
Makes a lot of sense. I'll give my favorite and then perhaps we can end this. So I think that long running tools is a really important one coming out because we've been looking at building agents on MCP itself. So exposing agents themselves as MCP servers. And so we have a cloud platform, MCP Cloud, that enables exactly that, where you build an agent with MCP agent and then you can kind of like deploy it as MCP servers. And we've had to go through all these hoops to kind of like model agent tool calls as long running async workflows, where, for example, for every MCP agent, we create like a start workflow, get status, kind of like a set of tools. And so having that supported as a first class primitive of MCP itself, I think really lends well to agent workflows, where I imagine in the future, Sam, like GitHub might even have, like a more complex data pipeline or some kind of like agentic kind of tool that takes a while to complete its task. And you don't want to have it block for the client just waiting until completion. So that's my personal favorite.
I agree. I will chime in just to say that we're probably one of the first, at least, like kind of major servers to have an agent to agent flow, but like it was fully asynchronous, and we just lean on the fact that GitHub Graph exists, so you've been able to assign stuff to coding agent for a while,
Yeah.
but we don't track it. Like you can see the PR and you can get progress on it by looking at that. But until we can actually let you get updates on the work log, the agent has no way of knowing how it's going yet. So super excited because we already have like asynchronous agents that are being triggered, but we're
Yeah.
missing like the whole meat of the interaction. And so yeah, like very excited to be able to tie that up finally.
100%. I think we could keep talking for another hour. There's so much to discuss here, and I truly just enjoyed brainstorming and talking to you folks. And thank you so much for coming, Tobin and Sam, and sharing all the really phenomenal work you're doing in the space. And hope we get to talk more afterwards. And if folks have more questions, please send them our way. We can also follow up async afterwards with like more context and details. And do check out the GitHub MCP server and also WorkOS. I think they're doing phenomenal work. So thank you everybody for joining, and thanks again to Tobin and Sam for presenting.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the Last Mile team for putting this together, and to everyone who's attending. For anyone who's interested, Sam and I are on the various parts of the internet and can be contacted.
Amazing.
Amazing.
All right. Take
Thank you.
care,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.